Welcome everyone, it's Gray Shirt Guy, Rock of the Gray Shirt. As always, we're back for another painting tutorial. We're going to be doing the Atlantian spears. Specifically, we're going to be showing you how to do the armor using an airbrush. All the other details, like the sword, the chain sword, the helmet, everything else is covered in the layering tutorial that is also on my channel, but we're only going to be covering the armor itself today. Now, let's see, before you get started, you want to have some sort of safety device when you're airbrushing, because you don't want any particulates getting your lungs. So wear a mask, wear a respirator, have some sort of filtration system. All right, we got that out of the way. Cool. Next thing, you want to take your model, you want to put a black primer, and you can use either a gray or a white zenithal. I do like the white zenithal. It does help the blue pop. So we have our heavy intercessor right there. Now, as you can see, the helmet right here is off separately because the helmet's going to be used with gold. We're not going to airbrush the gold. We're going to do that by hand. Some things that we're going to be using, some tools. We have our airbrush. Now we're going to be using a Badger Patriot 105. You want to use, specifically for this tutorial, you want to use a airbrush that is of a similar needle size and dimension. I don't know other manufacturers that are also similar to the 105, but a Badger 105 will work just fine, or some other airbrush that is good for shooting paint that's not designed for an airbrush. If you have something like a Iwata Eclipse, like this HP CS right here, this has a smaller needle, smaller thread, I do believe, and but it does not like non-airbrush paints. So we're going to be using the Badger Patriot 105 or 105 Patriot, however you want to say it. This one works really well when you're using paints that are not technically airbrush, or paints that are a little bit thicker than your like Vallejo Airline, really good through the Iwata. The Citadel Airline, not as good through the Iwata, and still requires lots of thinning. So we're going to use the Badger, and the Badger works well on non-airbrush paints, but you do have to thin it a little bit more than you would an airbrush paint. We're using that. We'll have our pump and our hose and everything set up. And yeah, so let's talk about the paints that we're going to use. We're going to be using Sotek Green for our first layer, put in a dropper bottle just for easier control, and a Temple Guard Blue for our final layer. In between that, we'll be using a all-over Coelia green shade. You can skip this step, what you can do first, instead of doing that. So I start with this, add an overall shade, and then we do a layer on top. You can actually go for this overall, then do this from just the top, and then you can line edge highlight the shade on afterwards, but I did not do that with this model. But if you wanted to, you would probably get a little bit more definition pop if you did the shade afterwards, but there's a lot more work in edge line highlighting the shade, so I didn't do it, and it works just fine. All right, I think that might have covered it. So one thing you're gonna need, just got your airbrush here. Apologies. So you also want some sort of airbrush holder. I do not know the exact. Oh, I forgot to mention the last three things you're going to need. You're going to need some water. I use distilled water. You don't need to use distilled water. I just have it readily available. And then for this, you're going to need some airbrush flow improver. I highly recommend it from Vallejo, and you're going to need some airbrush thinner. Also, you can get it from Vallejo. Because this is not paint that's designed for an airbrush, you're going to want to use, typically I would just use paint plus flow improver, but I'm going to need to use a little bit of thinner and some flow improver. Now, how much I use really depends on how much paint I need to put in the pot. So if I'm going to go for, let's say you see this little invisible line, see that weird line where the cup changes shape? So right where that line is, that's going to be how much paint I'm going to want to put in there. Now with that much paint, typically what I would do is I would do 3 drops of flow improver, or no, not 3. I'd do 6 drops of flow improver and 6 drops of distilled water, and I'd be good to go. But because this is not an airbrush paint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 6 drops of flow improver, 6 drops of water, and I'm going to add anywhere from 3 to 6 drops of airbrush thinner. Now, these ratios are not 100% definitive. Your humidity, your environment, all those things, they'll play into a factor. You just want to get a paint, and it's very trial and error. I know that's unfortunate, and it really sucks when I'm trying to explain it, but it's very trial and error. You want to get a skim milk consistency, like a really watery milk consistency. But if you have like a piece of paper, once you do a test shot through it, if it flows well, you're good to go. Now, if you have the Badger 105, it recommends a lower PSI. Unfortunately, on my air compressor, or well, fortunately, I've noticed that I can use this at a higher PSI than it's really designed to be used at. It doesn't damage it. It's just like the nozzle and everything is really designed for a lower PSI. But I use the same PSI for my Iwata, which is around 30 PSI. And I don't really ever change it much, and it shoots out the Patriot just fine. But the Patriot is designed for a much lower PSI. But it works just fine. I have in the past tried to change it back and forth, but it doesn't seem to really have that big of a problem. So, you know, your mileage may vary, but it works fine for me. But anyways, I want to make sure that your airbrush is always clean before you start. I already did a thorough cleaning, and yeah, so let's get into it. I'll do the setup with the compressor, and we'll be right back. All right, so our compressor is primed. We've mixed our paints in our paint cup. You will have some hobbyists, some painters who say never mix in your paint cup. You should mix. You should have it pre-mixed in a bottle. I actually ran out of my Sotek green in the tube, and I had to switch over and drop from the bottle, which was not fun. But anyways, we got it set up in here. We have our thinner. We want to move kind of quickly because the thinner and everything, they do evaporate. But what we're going to show you is I'm going to show you that it does shoot through pretty fine. So we don't have a problem. We've shot it through, and now I'm going to focus on getting it painted. Probably won't be able to hear me over the fan, but let's get to it. Take the model, put All right, so you do an overall base layer of the Sotek green. You can, if you want to, not shoot it so far underneath. I wanted to get the bottoms a little bit because we're going to be shading it with the shade paint. So do an overall spray with the airbrush. I'm going to cut it here. I'm going to go over and I'm going to finish using the rest of this paint to get the other models I have in the lineup, and then we'll come back for the next step. All right, I actually kind of got a little ahead of myself. So I finished in the base coats with the Sotek green through the airbrush, and now we're going to be doing the green shade. I'm going to do an overall shade here and get this all over the entire armor. Working my way around using a medium shade brush from Citadel. Want to be careful. This is the older. If you have the newer shades, the newer formula, you don't get as many tide marks. But I still have some batches of the old stuff, just working my way through it. So I want to be relatively quick with this stuff right here, getting all over everything. And as you can see, it's pretty quick. Doesn't take very long to work our way around the armor. And one thing I like about the shades is it actually provides a little bit of surface tension for other paints to stick onto it, so it's not glossy, which is good. No, it can look glossy, but it doesn't have that sort of gloss air. Like, it's not like a Tamiya clear, which Tamiya clears are hard to paint over. But no, these acrylic shades are fine. And just try to make sure it doesn't pool too hard in certain areas that you don't want it to pool. Obviously, areas that aren't going to be blue, you don't really have to cover it with a shade, but if it gets the shade, it's fine. All right. So it's going to pool in these little feet, so you want to kind of soak it up as much as you can, but still leave enough shade to give you that little definition. All right. If you have some tide marks on top, don't worry, you're going to get those with the next layer. All right, so we've done all of our overall shading. Let me do this little gun right here. Yep, even on the pauldrons, get the shade in there. It won't super matter for the pauldrons. You can probably skip this step. But I like to just get everything that's this bluish teal color. I like to give a nice undershade. It's the method of the madness. Right, the gun's going to be black, so I'm not going to worry about the gun. Overall, nice shade. Question: do you guys paint the little screens on their arms on these new Primaris Marines? I don't typically see. Some people think that they're not screens but they're panels, but some people paint them as screens. Just noticed it was a little interesting. But, all right, cool. Don't have any super poolage anywhere. Yeah, make sure you give your shades a nice shake. Give your shades a shake. All right, that is all set up. Cool. Now I'm gonna do this for the rest of the ones I was working on, and it'll take about an hour for these to dry, and so we'll come back and we'll do the last layer, which is the Temple Guard Blue. Now, in the meantime, what I did is I cleaned out the airbrush, but obviously you're still always going to have a little bit of paint in there. Using both an airbrush cleaner and the distilled water, did a couple cycles, and I leave water in there to prevent it from fully drying. You can shoot some thinner to it, and but this is how it's going to stay while I wait for this this wash to dry. But yeah, and we're moving on to the next step. We'll be back. We'll be back when we throw on some of this Temple Guard Blue. All right, so we've had our all over wash, that green shade done, and we mixed ourselves up our Temple Guard Blue with our thinner, some flow improver, and some distilled water, and we've shun it. You can see now we're pretty good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a top-down overall airbrush coat of the Temple Guard Blue, and we're going to leave the bottom and the lower sections pretty much untouched. So let's get to it.
Never want to forget the glove. Unless you want to get, well, it's acrylic paint, so I guess you could get it on your hands and you'd be fine.
Well, here I have to apologize because I didn't realize that my hand was in the way the entire time, and you're not able to see this layer of Temple Guard Blue being applied. You're only being able to see the end result. I'm going to keep this part sped up, and you'll be able to see the end result when I'm done, but I'm really sorry about this. I've never shot an over-the-shoulder camera method. I've never had the angle before. I've never filmed in the spray booth before, so it's all new to me. Unfortunately, I don't have any models to paint for the Atlantian spears outside of an Astreus heavy battle tank, and I wasn't planning on assembling that for until later in the summer. So that was going to be the only other time you see this blue being applied, but it's basically a top-down zenithal highlight of the Temple Guard Blue over the other layers that I've talked about. So hopefully you'll be able to get something from that. But yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, let's just see how it turns out.
All right, so
That's pretty much it. That's how you do the airbrush method to get the armor where you need to go. Three simple colors. You can even skip a step and then do the panel lining later. I think it works pretty well. After that, feel free to go check out the layering tutorial to get all the other colors to get yourself up to something that looks a little bit like this. So thanks for watching, and hope you enjoy, and hope we get some pretty good content coming in 2023. Got a whole bunch of Christmas Marines getting ready to get base coated, but I'm gonna work on getting this Temple Guard Blue shot down on the other three, and get this 5-man squad of heavy intercessors up on the battlefield. So hope you guys enjoy. Have a great one, and see you later. Goodbye.